Hi everybody. In this video, what I'd like to do is go over the first lab assignment using Excel. And I just want to make clear too, I'm not going to go through the entire assignment from beginning to end. I'm going to just really show you some of the tougher parts, the parts that involve using Excel's formulas. All right. Well, in sheet 1, remember what you need to do is just follow your instructions. I've given you some instructions and they walk you through how to do this literally step by step. Well, you're going to get to a point where you've entered all this data and you've formatted all these cells, and it should look something pretty similar to this. So what I want to talk about is how we're going to get some of these totals. So for example, right in here, we're going to be asked to compute the sum of these sales for January. And there are a variety of ways to do that, and the instructions walk you through a few of those ways. So let me go through a couple of those. Well, let's click on the cell that we want to work in. Anytime that we want to start some formula that we're going to use, when we want Excel to compute something, we need to always begin with an equal sign. That's telling Excel you're going to be computing something now. And there are a variety of ways to enter in the formula. So for example, what I really want to do here is I want to take all of these cells and add them up. And you might recall from reading your directions that every single cell has an address. So the address of this cell right here, for example, it's in column B, it's in row 4. So it's B4. So I might put in B4, and you see how Excel gives me some feedback showing me that I'm trying to work with this cell right here. So it highlights it for me. So what I really want to do is take B4 and then add that to B5. So I can type in B5, and I want to add that to B6. So plus B6 plus B7. That would give me the sales for January. At that point, all I need to do is hit enter. So I can hit enter, but I can also hit this green check mark. That's like hitting enter. So the nice thing about Excel is there are often several ways to do the same thing. So there we go. There we have a sum for January sales. Let's do the same thing again right over here. I'm going to type in an equal sign. And now I want to take C3 plus C4. I'm sorry, I actually want C4 plus C5, C6, C7. Let's say I made that mistake and I put in C3. I would see that that's not what I want. That's one of the nice things about Excel. So C4 plus C5 plus C6 plus C7, hit my enter key. All right. Now there are some easier ways to do this. I shouldn't have to actually type in every single cell reference, every single cell address by name. I've got a range here. Excel should be able to understand that I want to begin, in this case, in D4 and go all the way to D7. So let's try it this way. So let's hit our equal sign so Excel knows it needs to compute something. And now I'm going to use a command, and the command is sum. So you see, as I start typing in command names, a bunch of other command names come up because these are other command names with a similar beginning, a similar root. I want to use the sum command. So when I use that sum command, I want to open up my parentheses because now I need to tell it what to sum. And what I want it to do now is sum from D4 all the way to D7. So I could type in D4, and you see that highlights. And then the way I tell it to sum from one location and go all the way to another location is by putting a colon in there. So D4 all the way through D7. I can then close my parentheses, hit enter, and it will automatically do that for me. Let me show you another way that we can do that. I'm going to delete this. I'm going to hit the equal sign. I'm going to type in sum. And then I'm going to open up my parenthesis. Now it's looking for, where's the data range? It wants to know what numbers we're going to put in there. I can use my mouse to show that data range. So I just clicked, I'm holding down my mouse button, and now I'm lifting up. You see it automatically put in D4 to D7. Now you can close that parenthesis to kind of make it more formal, but let's say you didn't. You can hit enter and it's still going to work it out. So Excel is oftentimes very forgiving with those things. And let me show you even another way. So you'll see that we obviously have lots of things we can do on this menu above here. One is this auto sum. This actually shows all of the different formulas that Excel is capable of computing, all the different functions. So it's set to auto sum. So if I just click on auto sum, you see it figured that I wanted to sum the numbers that were right above. So with one click, I'm actually able to do exactly what I wanted, sum from D4 to D7. Now, Excel will predict what I wanted. It's not always going to predict accurately. So I need to check to make sure that's what I want. D4 to D7, that's what I want, so I hit enter. So there are several ways to get this done. What I want is for you to get this done. So if you're able to do this lab project by skipping a couple steps because you know something about Excel, then that's great. If you need to take it step by step according to the instructions, that's great too, because you'll be learning Excel. So my job right here is just to show you the formulas that are really being used. All right, well, we also need to sum up these totals. So the total for headsets, that would be the total of these values right here. So let's practice using that auto sum. So I'm going to click on auto sum. And again, it was able to predict that I wanted to use these values right in here, B4 to D4. Here's B4 all the way to D4. We can see that it's highlighted. We can see that these marching ants are around the range that we're interested in. So it's the way we want it. I'm going to hit enter. Now check this out. This is where something kind of neat happens. I could go ahead and auto sum again and hit enter, and then auto sum again, and then auto sum again. But instead of doing that, I'm going to tell you how we can use a technique in which we can auto-fill, we can automatically fill cells that we're working right near. So for example, I'm working right near this cell that comes right after this cell. And I want to do essentially the exact same thing. Instead of summing B4 to D4, as we do right here, when I'm right over here in this cell, I'm going to want to sum from B5 all the way to D5. Well, here's the neat thing. When I have this cell highlighted, when I have that activated, if I use this autofill handlebar, now watch my cursor. Watch how it's going to change its shape. See how it changed its shape right when I got onto that autofill handlebar? And the autofill handlebar is just that little dark square that you see in the lower right corner of the activated cell. So there I'm hitting that handlebar. So when my mouse touches that handlebar, it will change the cursor shape. And now if I click with my mouse button, my left mouse button, and I pull down, I drag down, I'm still holding that mouse button. When I lift up, it will have automatically essentially copied the commands that I used right here to put them in this next cell. Now what I like to do at this point is kind of click away to turn off any highlighting. And then I click back on the cell to look and see if that's the formula that I wanted. And if I click on the formula bar, it'll even highlight for me right in here the cells that are being used. So it did it correctly. It realized that I wanted to use B5 to D5. Well, instead of just doing that for that one cell, we can go all the way down. So I could use autofill all the way down here. And bam, we can see that when we check our work, here it goes from B5 to D5. I'm going to come down here, B6 to D6. B7 to D7, that's exactly what I wanted. And right here, B8 to D8. Now one thing you'll notice is that sometimes when you use autofill, it will mess up your formatting. This green double line I had there before. But you see what it's doing when we autofill is it's copying not only the command, it's copying the formatting. And this cell right here had no formatting. So what I would need to do is just go back and put in my double underline. No big deal. All right, well that essentially sums it up for the first part of the lab project, for what we had titled Sheet 1. Now at some point in the instructions it also had you look at Sheet 2, but that remains blank. All right, let's take a look at the next one. And in this next one, again, you're going to start with, I think, a relatively blank sheet, and you're going to enter in a lot of this information. And once you enter in this information, you're then going to format the cells so that you learn how to do that. But my goal, as I mentioned, is really just to teach you about some of the formulas that you'll be using. People tend to have a little bit more trouble with those. All right, so let's figure out what we need to do here. What we need to do next in the instructions is compute the total retail values for the information that we have in here. So for example, when it comes to these antenna signal boosters in Dallas, we can see how many we have in stock, 1,126, and the retail price of each item. So what's the total retail value? Well, the way that I can find that is I can take the value in this cell, C5, and multiply it by the value in this cell, D5. So I'm going to take 1126 and multiply by 1999 to find the total retail value. Okay, so what we're going to want to do is take C5 and multiply it by D5. So I'm going to type in my equal sign to tell Excel to do something. I'm going to tell it to take C5, that cell right there, and instead of typing in C5, what I could have done was just clicked on the C5. I usually find that it's easier to type things in than grabbing from a mouse. And then to show multiplication, I'm going to hit the asterisk key, which is above the 8 on a typical keyboard. So I'm going to hit Shift 8. That's going to give me the asterisk key. That little symbol right there shows multiplication. And I want to multiply by D5. So I can just click on the cell or I can type in D5. And then I'm going to hit enter. All right, and then I get the total retail value. Now we could go ahead and continue to do that. So I can type in equals C6 times D6 and find that value. But because I'm doing the same thing over and over for the rest of these values, all I really need to do is use my autofill. So I'm simply clicking on the cell. I'm going to use my autofill handlebar. So you see my mouse changes shape. I'm on it, I click, and I'm going to drag all the way down. And when I drag all the way down, I then have all the values that I need. I can click on them to make sure it's doing what I want. It's C7 times D7, C8 times D8, C9 times D9, and so forth. Okay. Right in here also, we had to find a sum, total retail value for all the products, and it makes a lot of sense to use the auto sum. And there it predicted correctly that I wanted this range right in here, E5 to E10. I'm just going to hit enter, and there we have it. Now here's something kind of neat. This is where we look at the percent of total retail value, and the thing that's neat about it is I'm going to show you a little trick that's really important. And in this trick, we need to use it because we run into a problem. We'll discover the problem pretty quickly. So for example, if I want to figure out what percentage 22,508 is of this total right here, I need to take this value in E5. So I'm going to begin with an equal sign. I want to take the value in E5 and I want to divide it by this value right here, the total, which is in E11. E11. All right, so it highlighted these things for me. So if I want to take E5 and divide by E11, that's how I would put it into Excel. And I just hit enter. Now, let's say I want to take these same commands and copy them into these boxes right here because I want to figure out the percentage of the total retail value for the car power port adapters in this row and the repeater antenna in this row and so forth. Look at the problem that I run into. If I use autofill, let's just autofill down one cell. I run into a problem. I'm going to click away to turn off any highlighting, then click back on this cell. And it tells me there's a problem. If I click on this, it can say it's dividing by 0. And that doesn't make sense. And if I actually click on the formula bar, it'll highlight the cells I'm working with. So Excel was able to predict that I wanted to go from E5 to E6 because now I'm working with this cell when I'm in this cell right here. But then it also predicted that I wanted to move down one row from E11. But E11 is where the total is, and that doesn't ever move. So using autofill, we kind of run into a problem. So we need to deal with that. And this is the way we deal with that. We go to the original cell that we're working with, and I can double click on it to work on it right here. And what I want it to do is when I use autofill, I want this E5 to change to an E6 and then an E7 and an E8 and an E9. And when I leave it alone just like this, that's what it will do. But I want to protect the E11 from changing. So the way I do that, and what I really want to do is protect the 11 from changing, because the only time the E is going to change is if I'm autofilling to the right or to the left. I'm not. I'm just going up and down. I'm just traversing these different rows. So I'm moving from 11 to 12 to 13 is what Excel thinks I want to do, but I want it to stay at E11. Well, the way I do it, it's very simple. I just put a $sign right before the 11. So that $sign protects whatever comes next to it. So it's protecting the 11. It won't change. So I'm going to hit enter so it will accept these changes. And now look at what happens when I use the autofill. Let's just autofill down one cell. I'm going to click away to turn off the highlighting, then click on my cell. And you can see it was smart enough to take the E5 and turn it into an E6, but then it kept that E11. And again, I can look at it up here on the formula bar, or I can double click over here and look at it right here. So it's doing exactly what I want it to do. It's now taking this value and dividing by that same value. So now I'm going to use autofill for the rest of the way down. Click away, and there we have it. All right, let's go ahead and look at the next section. This next section is probably the most demanding one. It's the one that gives people the most trouble. So let's talk about it a little bit here. All right, what we have are these tours that a tour company is providing. So if they give the Pacific Odyssey tour, they're going to charge $3,105. And what we're going to do here is count up how many of these different tours have been sold. And then we're going to add up the revenue that they've accumulated. And then we're going to compute an average price because apparently they're not always charging the same price. So here's a list of all the different tours that they have sold. All right, and you can see that there are obviously doubles, okay, and several of the same tour being sold. All right, so first we want to count up how many tours were sold, and according to the instructions, we're going to use the COUNTIF command. So I'm going to hit my equal sign to tell Excel that it's time to begin computing something, and I'm going to type in COUNTIF because what we want to do is count if something is true. All right, now once I get to that name of that command, once I hit the open parenthesis, it now helps me cheat essentially. It says, all right, where do you want me to look? Where is the range of data that you want me to look in? What we're trying to do is look in this range of data right here from A6 all the way down to A25. So we're trying to figure out in this range of all these tours, how many times do we see the tour name Pacific Odyssey? So I'm going to tell it that the range is from A6 all the way down to A25. So I'm going to type that in, A6, and remember I put that colon to show the range. So I go from A6 to A25. And I could have just highlighted that with my mouse if I wanted to. And now it tells me to put a comma because the next part of this command is going to take place. So now you see how it highlighted criteria? Because what Excel is saying is, okay, fine, I will look in this range, A6 to A25 that we've highlighted. What do you want me to look for? Once you tell me what to look for, I'll then count it up. Well, I want it to find the words Pacific Odyssey that I have right here. Because every time it sees the words Pacific Odyssey, it's going to count it. So that's what I'm trying to count right now, because in this little grid that we're making, Pacific Odyssey, right over here, we're going to show how many tours were sold. So I want to look for the words Pacific Odyssey, and those are right here in F7. So I'm going to type in F7. I'm now going to close my parentheses, and when I hit enter, it should count up in this list every time it sees the words Pacific Odyssey. And there it goes. All right, well, we're going to use the exact same commands for these other tours below, but before we use autofill, let's go ahead and do some of the other things we need to do. So in this case, we're going to compute the revenue. So how much money did they bring in from selling these Pacific Odyssey tours? So now let's use the SUMIF command. So I begin with an equal sign. I'm going to type in SUMIF. And you might wonder, like, well, how do you know, like which formulas to be using, which Excel commands to be using? Well, you learn them over time. And you can also click on this little help button right here, and you can search for the different commands that exist in Excel. It's not like anything else. It just takes time to learn a program so that you can master it. So I'm going to use the SUMIF command. And remember, once I open up my parenthesis, it now kind of walks me through it. So now it's saying, where is the range that you want me to look in? Well, I want to find the tours that begin with the words Pacific Odyssey in this range right here. So again, that's A6 all the way to A25. So I'm going to type in A6 colon A25. Now I need to put a comma, and you see how it moved me to where it says the criteria. So now I need to know what is it that we're actually looking for. Once Excel starts looking in this range, what should it look for? Well, remember, we're dealing with the Pacific Odyssey tour. So I want it to find the words Pacific Odyssey. And that's where I can tell it, just consult this cell right here. That tells you what to look for. That's in F7. So F7. I hit my comma. Now it's saying fine. Every time I find a Pacific Odyssey, like right over here, what do you want me to do? Well, we're going to want it to sum the values in column B. So it's asking for another range. So all those values are in B6 all the way to B25. So right here, I'm going to tell it B6 colon B25. And you can see it highlighted that. So just walking through this for a second, it's going to look in this range, A6 to A25. When it finds the word Pacific Odyssey, like it does right here, it's going to take this value and it's going to add it to the next time it sees Pacific Odyssey, and it will add it to that value. So it's going to take all the times it sees Pacific Odyssey and add up all those numbers. So we can close our parenthesis and then hit enter. And there is the total revenue that they sold for the Pacific Odyssey tour. Well, for whatever reason, they were not always getting the same price for these Pacific Odyssey tours. So now we're going to compute an average price. And the way we can do that is by using the average if command. It's very much like the command we just used. So I type in equals and then type in average if. Okay, open up my parentheses. It helps me walk through it. So where's the range that we want it to look? Well, I want it to look for the Pacific Odyssey tour from D6 to D25. So I put in D6 colon D25. All right, I'm done with that part of the formula. So I hit my comma, and now it's asking me what's the criteria. So what do you want me to look for? Well, again, we want to look for Pacific Odyssey, which we have right here in F7. So we want to look for F7. Hit my comma. Now it's saying, where do you want me to look for the data to compute the average? Well, we know that that's here in column B, from B6 to B25. So I type in B6 colon B25. All right, I can now go ahead and close my parentheses and hit enter. Okay, a little bit of a problem there for some reason. Let's see, D6 to D25. Okay, I put in D instead of A. I don't know how I made that mistake, but I did. A6 to A25. So when I change that, I can now hit enter, and there I have now the average price. All right, so I want to do the exact same thing for the old Japan tour and the exact same thing for this tour and this tour. So I should be able to highlight all these cells right here, and I can highlight them by clicking in the middle of the cell, and I'm holding my mouse key and I'm moving over to highlight all those cells. Now you see that was different from autofilling. I'm going to click away for a minute. If I'm in this cell and I want to use autofill, I come all the way down here to the lower right. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to highlight all these cells. So I click in the middle, I hold my mouse key and I highlight them all. Now I could use autofill to save myself a lot of time, and instead of having to write all those formulas in here, I can autofill them down. But look, we run into a problem. So let's just do it for one row down. Although I don't necessarily see a problem right here, look at what happened. I'm going to click on our formula so it can highlight for me what's going on in the spreadsheet. Remember, my actual list of tours begins in A6, and it goes all the way down then to A25. But because I used autofill, Excel was thinking I would want to change the A6 to an A7 and the A25 to an A26. I really didn't want to do that. Throughout everything that I compute here, I always want to use this same list of tours, A6 to A25. Now, the one thing that I do want to change is when I start working on the old Japan tour, I no longer want to look in F7. I want to look at F8. So it did change that correctly. So bottom line is we have a little bit of a problem. So I'm going to delete everything that we have right here, and we're just going to make some changes to these original formulas that we used. I'm going to double click so I can edit this cell. Now what I want to do is protect the A6 and the A25 from changing. So one thing I can do is I can go ahead and put my $ before the 6 and my $ before the 25. Sorry, the $ before the 25. Hit enter, that will work. Another way that I can do that, I'm going to undo it real quickly, is to come in here, and if I go to the middle of this right in here, that A6, I can hit the F4 button. So the F keys you see at the top of your keyboard, look at what happens when I hit F4. Do you see how it automatically put those dollar signs before the A and the 6? Now in this case, it's fine to protect the A. That wasn't going to change anyway, but it also protected the 6 too. And then I can go ahead and I can move right over here and I can hit my F4 button again to put in automatically those dollar signs. So some people find that helpful, and your instructions give you that quick tip. Now we don't want to protect the F or the 7 from changing. The F is not going to change when we pull down anyway, because all we're doing is changing from row to row. It's going to want to change the F7 to an F8, and that's what we're going to want it to do. So I'm happy with this formula the way it is. I'm going to hit enter. Let's do the same thing over here with our other formulas. So I'm going to double click so that we can work on the formula. I want to protect this first range, A6 to A25, because this is never going to change. Even when I'm looking at the old Japan tour and the other tours, I always want to look at this list. So I'm going to come to the middle of the A6 and click and hit F4. I'm going to come to the middle of the A25 and click my F4. I can see that that range is now protected from changing when I use autofill. And then I also need to protect this range because it's going to change the B6 to a B7, then a B8, then a B9. I don't want that. Here is my data, always from B6 to B25. So I go between the B and the 6, I hit my F4, then I go between the B and the 25, I hit my F4. Now that whole thing is protected. I can hit enter, and that formula is now protected the way it needs to be. Notice we didn't protect the F7 because when we autofill down, we want to change to an F8, F9, F10. So that it looks for the data for these tours. And of course, we're going to need to do the same thing here. So I double click, and real quickly, I will protect these ranges. All right, they're protected. I'm going to hit enter. Now check this out. I'm going to highlight these 3 cells, and I'm going to use autofill to quickly complete the table. I'm going to click away to turn off the highlighting, and let's check to make sure it did it right. So I double click so I can see my formula, A6 to A25. That's exactly what I want it to be, but now it changed the F7 to an F8, so now it's looking for old Japan. I'm going to hit my escape key to get out of that. Let's look at this one right over here. Here we can look at the formula if we wind up in the formula bar. The A6 to the A25 remain the same, the B6 to the B25 remain the same, but the F8 changed. It was an F7, so it did exactly what we wanted. Now keep looking up here. I'm going to arrow down over here and go to these next ones. We should see that the only thing that will change is the F8 is going to change to an F9 right there, and it does. Keep your eyes up here. And now when I click over here, it should change to an F10, and it does. You see, these ranges did not change at all. Same thing will happen here. So we've got the ranges A6 to A25 and B6 to B25 protected. F7 is not protected, so keep your eyes up here. When I click down, I should see that the F7 changes to an F8, then an F9, then an F10, and it did that automatically. That's the beauty of autofill. All right, real quickly, let's look at this last one. In this last one, we're going to use what's known as the if command. It's a very helpful command, and all these commands that we're using are going to be helpful to us later on when we start analyzing our own data. And what we're trying to do right here is have Excel make some decisions for us. So we have these tours, and we only have so many seats available for these tours, the actual capacity for these tours. And we can see that a number of seats have already been reserved. So what we're going to try to determine is how many seats are still available, if any. All right, and the way that we're going to do that is by using this if command. And essentially what we wanted to do is we want to say if this value right here, the actual capacity, how many seats are really on that tour. If this value is greater than this value, then we're going to have a compute how many seats are left. So for example, let's look at this second row. There are 47 seats for the Old Japan Tour. 41 are already reserved. So we know that 6 are still available. But over here, there are 50 seats for the Pacific Odyssey Tour and 50 are reserved. So there are none left that are available. So we can have it quickly compute that and then show us right here how many seats are available or if none are available. And this is how we will do it. So I'm going to begin with my equal sign, and I'm going to begin with the command if. And I'm going to open up the parenthesis so I can see what the different parts of this command are. There are actually 3 parts. Now pay attention, it's actually a simple command, but people do get a little confused by it. The reason why it's called the if command is because Excel is going to make a decision based on this first little test that we put in. And what we're trying to do is figure out, are there seats still left? So if there are seats left, what do we want the command to do? So the first thing we have to figure out is, are there seats left? So here we have D7. D7 shows the capacity. So if D7 is greater than E7, well, if D7 is greater than E7, that means there are some seats available, right? So I'm going to put my comma in here, and it's going to take me to the next part of the command. So if D7 is greater than E7, in other words, if this command right in here, if this part of the command is true, what do we want Excel to do? So for this part of the formula, for this part of this command, it's asking us, what do you want Excel to do now if D7 really is greater than E7, if that value really is true? Well, what we want it to do is compute for us how many seats are available. So we would take D7 and subtract E7. It would compute how many seats are left. So I'm done with the middle part of the formula. I hit my comma to move on to the last part, this third part. And here it's saying, what do you want Excel to do if that first little test is false? So if it looks at D7 and it finds it is not greater than E7, and that's going to be the case in this particular example, what do we want Excel to do if D7 is not greater than E7? So in other words, what do we want it to do if that little test that we perform in this first step is false? And what we want it to do in this case is just type in the word none. And the way that we do that, the way that we tell it to put in an actual word, is we have to put it in quotes. And I just put in that word, none, and I close my quotes. All right, now I'm going to close my parentheses. So you see we have three parts to this formula. Let me just go through it again really quickly. So we begin it with the if statement. I open up my parentheses, and here's the first part, and it's testing this first part. It's testing to see if D7 is greater than E7. If it is, Excel will do this next thing. It will compute the difference between D7 and E7. If this test is false, it will then do this thing right here, this third part, and just type in the word none. So you might recall, although it's hard to see right now, there were 50 seats for the tour and 50 seats reserved. So when I hit enter, it's going to see that this is false, and it should just show us that no seats are available. I hit enter, and there's the word none. Now I'm going to be using this exact same format for the command all the way down. And when I use autofill, that D7 and E7 will change to a D8 and an E8. And then a D9 and an E9, and so forth. So I can use autofill all the way down to save myself a lot of time. Let's just autofill down one time so you can see how it works when there are seats available. I'm going to click away. I'm going to double click so we can see it. So now it looked to see, was D8 greater than E8? This was the test. And let me actually get out of this so it's easier to see. We can look at the formula up here. So if D8 is greater than E8, so it's evaluating that. And look, D8 is indeed greater than E8. So this little test that it did right here in the first part is true. Well, remember, if this test is true, it then moves on to this middle part of the formula and it computes it. So it takes D8 and it subtracts E8. Well, here's D8. When we subtract E8, it shows us how many seats are left. So because this was true, it did the second part of the formula. If this was false, it would have done the third part of the formula. That's how the if command works. So let's autofill all the way down. And that, my friends, is the end of this first Excel lab assignment.